It's time now to begin to arrest those who have gone against our government, the Cheneys, the Rumsfelds, all of them. Liz Cheney is nothing more than a surrogate of her father. She's pathetic. And all of this notion that we have a republic and they call it a democracy. I want all of our politicians to learn one simple lesson. Our founding fathers did not want a democracy, you morons, for the simple reason that each person would have had a vote. And that's what they learned from the French. Instead, we have a republic, which means it's representation. So from now on, the Condis and Nancy Pelosi, where do you think Pelosi comes from? Alessandro, corruption in Maryland. I had to deal with her father and her brother. Old Italian mafia, no accountability.
I was going to hold off, but I see his smiling face in the monitor right now. So I'm like, you know what? Let's just go to it. Let's just welcome him in. And Steve, you know, I'm going to be probably holding you hostage for as long as you'll let me, because I'm very excited to talk to you. And in full disclosure, Dr. Pieczenik, I do need to tell you that my husband is a huge fan of yours. So if you have someone sliding into your DMs a lot, his name's John Scott. And he's sliding into your DMs because he's been a fan for years and years and years. And so he is also very excited that and jealous that I get to talk to you today.
Well, thank him and thank you. You're quite interesting and attractive.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, see, I was ready to flatter you and now you're flattering me. And so this is just going to work out great. This is going to be great. But my gosh.
Well, it's obvious. You know how you're charming, but you also know how to go for the throat. And that's what I admire.
Oh, well, gosh, that is a huge honor to hear that from you.
I knew what you were like. And so I congratulate you and your husband.
Oh, thanks. He will be so thrilled. So like I said, when I was trying to throw together a bio, it's like impossible because you have really done all of the things. But I was interested. I mean, I know that many people know Dr. Pieczenik from being perhaps the basis of the character of Jack Ryan in the Tom Clancy books, but you're also an author yourself. So I'm definitely going to be wanting to dig into that, because in looking at the descriptions of your books, I was like, is he also a prophet? Because some of these things that are storylines in your books sound very much like what's happening right now. So I wanted to ask you about that. And I'm going to take you through the books one by one, and we're going to end up getting cut off by the break, but then we'll just dig right back into it. But the first one is in Maximum Vigilance. You have, as the president's personal psychiatrist, Dr. Clark, here I am telling you about your own book, but it says that he's a prominent crisis manager and must decide whether the president of the United States is mentally competent to manage an international crisis that can precipitate World War III. Wow, that sounds really familiar to something that could be going on right now.
You're absolutely right, Christy, and I'm glad you brought it up. There is an issue, and I've talked about it before on the Alex Jones show, that we have a problem with Biden. He has a problem. He should never have been the president of the United States, and the Democratic Party really has no right to put in a man with 2 or 3 aneurysms. He's incompetent. Even his own staff knows that.
Very exciting guest to have on today, Dr. Steve Pieczenik, Harvard-educated psychiatrist with an MD from Cornell University, a PhD in international relations from MIT, served 4 presidential administrations as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, International Crisis Manager, Hostage Negotiator, Charmer. And we were talking about his books before the break. And Dr. Pieczenik, just before we went to break, I said we were talking about Biden's brain, and what I meant to say was Biden's brain, or lack thereof it, but I got cut off.
I understand, Christy. I'm not a prophet. What happened was very simple. Having served in several administrations, and without revealing anything, I used to give a lecture at the War College, and the lecture was the mental health of our presidents and their physical health. And it was important for our military and intelligence officers to understand, number one, we had a real problem with Woodrow Wilson. For a year and a half, he was in a coma. No one wrote about it. It was covered up. And as a result, we had a lot of problems in the civilian section. Then we run to John F. Kennedy, whom I kind of knew indirectly because he was admitted to Cornell University Medical College, and one of the attendants told me that his back problem was really a result of a very serious disease called Addison's disease, which is mainly the absence of adrenal gland. And that's why he looked so handsome and tan. It was really a pathological tan. And we in the administration knew there was going to be a limited amount of time that he could be in the office and never should have been in the office because he was totally disoriented. And he was at the same time given all kinds of drugs by Dr. Feelgood. And what happened eventually, and I won't go into the issue of his assassination, it was a result of his own disease and problems. And LBJ had to come in. But that wasn't the end of it. It also was a problem with Ronald Reagan. Contrary to what most conservatives would love to be, I was very quiet in that administration, and I had to admire, and I will say publicly, that Senator Baker, James Baker of Texas, did a phenomenal job covering up on Reagan, and I never said a word about him. And actually, I left after a couple of months. He had correctly the beginnings or the middle of dementia, and the person who picked it up, and he was very diplomatic, was President Bill Clinton at the end, who said, well, I just saw Reagan, and he's fully demented. Well, he was correct. And we kept that a secret. Should I have kept that a secret? Did I have an obligation as a physician? Those are the questions that came up. In turn, my outlet was always fiction. Since I was a young boy, I wanted to write, and because I didn't come into this language by genetics, I came here as a refugee from Cuba. I really loved the English language, and like many others who came before me, or A.J. Cronin or Somerset Maugham, who are also doctors, I felt that I needed to write about a president who was not competent. Now, this has been an issue. And unfortunately, we do not have a lot of accountability in our systems. Contrary to what they say, you can vote them out, you can vote them in, but we have no medical criteria for a presidency. And ironically, 700 psychiatrists under Dr. Lee from Yale University Psychiatric Unit wanted to declare that Trump had malignant narcissism and was impaired. The irony is we have Biden right now, and he has a serious problem. I don't wish it upon him. I don't think it's great, but he should never have run for the presidency. He knows that. His wife understands that. And everyone around him, from Blinken to Wendy Sherman, should have said that will not work. And look at the way he stands there. Now, Anderson Cooper knows very well what that issue is. Why? With all due respect to Anderson Cooper, he spent every summer working for the CIA. Now, I'm not getting into conspiracy theories, but here is a man who, quote, is a journalist, but not really. A man who was trained by the agency and never admitted to what he was doing. And here you see him kind of help out Biden, which is pathetic for us. And in the world stage, you can assume that President Xi Jinping of China, who's been thrown out 6 to 7 times, whose father was thrown out 6 to 7 times, is clearly saying, wow, I can push the boundaries with America. And that's why you see these military movements in the South China Sea. At the same time, Putin can be somewhat grandiose and, play with a very attractive interviewer, a woman who is really quite sharp, and basically say, look, I'm not concerned about what you Americans are doing. I know your problem. We're oil independent. So in effect, I was really writing a historical novel and saying, I hope I'm not correct.
But coming back to that, again, we're talking about Dr. Pieczenik's book, Maximum Vigilance. And we're talking about how in this book, Dr. Clark is a crisis manager and must decide whether the president of the United States is mentally competent to manage an international crisis. And we now have Biden in office who we don't even need a doctor to tell us that there is an issue with mental capacity there. But in the final sentence of the summary of your book, it says, Dr. Clark must rethink everything he and his government stand for as America faces one of the most insidious threats of all time. So I'm asking you, what does Dr. Clark do in this situation? Who's going to save us?
Well, let me put it this way. I would have said and pushed forward to Baker Act the president. They're not going to do that. He's a danger to himself and to others. Technically, he should not be there. I think part of what we're doing right now is really a message to the administration. Get rid of the problem right there. I don't want Kamala Harris. I don't want anybody who has not earned their stripes to be the president of the United States. But at present, I'm saying he is not competent to stand as president of the United States. He is a danger to himself and others. That's the psychiatric opinion. I was a board examiner in psychiatry and neurology for 10 years. And had he come as a patient, I would have asked, okay, give me the diagnosis. So it's up to the rest of our country to decide what to do. My world, I'm not going to get into it because there are parts of my life that I don't write about. And I don't want to go into that right now.
Okay, let's switch.
But this is a problem. Look at him, and look at what Anderson Cooper's trying to do. So
we'll come back to that. Let's switch gears though, and move on to another book, In Mind Palace. This is talking about Natalia, a beautiful mistress of a Soviet leader. She's incarcerated because she's diagnosed with schizophrenia, and come to find out that it's Natalia alone that possesses information that could lead to the total upheaval of Soviet society. So in our current political climate, you see dissenters being called domestic terrorists as far as parents are concerned, that actually want to be involved in their school board meetings, conspiracy theorists, insane extremists. So in this book, she's purposely imprisoned for being diagnosed with schizophrenia. So I think you know the comparison I'm making here. Is this because of a fear that for those that dissent, for those that are called domestic terrorists when they're clearly not, is this the avenue that you would see happening, is them finding ways to imprison innocent people that dare to speak up and dare to go against the fray?
I would say yes and no, because in the Soviet Union, it was easier to be incarcerated when Putin was not there. And the issue was the KGB had come in, and they had a diagnosis we do not have here, and that was called sluggish schizophrenia, which was absurd. Here, what we have going on is that we do have a problem with the administration, and we're not going to put the president away unless they decide, they being the people in power right now, decide that he has to be placed in an institution or a hospital.
I was going to ask you, Dr. Pieczenik, about In Blood Heat, but I think that's the most obvious one because that one talks about an outbreak and a web of bizarre events and alliances involving government officials and a CEO of a pharmaceutical company. So I think that's pretty self-explanatory why I would think that you predicted what's going on right now with that.
Well, let me just elaborate a little bit, Christy. Fauci was my intern when I came out of Cornell Med, and I was not the top student. I was 87th out of 88. I could have been 88, but he was dead. Fauci took me under his wing and trained me in internal medicine, and I never forgot that. However, over the 30 or 40 years when Tony went to NIH, I was saying to him, what are you doing? You're not a scientist. You were not trained in amino acid sequencing. And then finally, when he came out about the mask and non-mask and this whole issue, I said, Tony, you're out of your league. This is incredibly incompetent. And I watched a man literally destroy himself who had been a very good clinician, not a great scientist, and now he's basically being brought up on charges of felony because he did lie. He supported Wuhan. Let me talk about another one because I think it's important, and you showed it in your video. Colin Powell died. I worked with Colin Powell. It was not a good relationship. I knew him because I came out of Harlem. I was 108th in Amsterdam. He came out of Harlem. But unlike myself, he used the fact that he was African-American or black in order to get himself ahead. And when I had to deal with the evacuation of Vietnam, I saw that I had a problem with Major Powell. He had basically lied to the government, our government, and to the President Nixon and others, saying that there was no My Lai massacre. But that little guy, Kelly, was the one who was in charge and created the problem. So Kelly went to prison for 2.5 years. Meanwhile, Powell got away scot-free. And he was a terrible, terrible general. And then when I had to deal with him in Panama, he threw me off the base. And it was others who brought me back in because I was taking out Noriega. And Colin and I did not get along. Finally, towards the end of his life, and what he did, he lied again when he said, we're going into Iraq, a war we did not need at all, given the fact that we've never won any wars. We're going into Iraq because there's anthrax here in a little bottle. And I said, my God, what a pathological liar. So what we have coming here, Christy, and fortunately or unfortunately, I could tell you, Fauci has become one of those pathological liars. Powell has become one of them. And we have a sequence of that coming out in this administration, and it's not by chance, because the liars expose themselves and finally self-destruct. We had, I said Colin Powell, but you had also, oh, well, there it is. That's the little vial of anthrax. Rumsfeld, another disaster. He had been in the war. He was a disaster in the war. McCain. When McCain came black, I had an order to arrest him for insubordination and the death of several Navy officers on board the carrier in which he crashed in, and he was a disaster. Then when he revealed everything in the Hanoi Hilton, he was released, but he should have been charged with treason, and he wasn't. So when he came back, I was told to lay off of McCain. And this was the beginning of a whole series of problems that we've had in sequence from one administration to another. Lies, complicity, corruption. And what I'm getting at is the Republic can only tolerate so much. And the reason I would go on the Alex Jones show, and now with you, Christy, is that literally the alternative media, which you will become the mainstream media, was the only way to bring out these statements and the truth. And ironically, the military intelligence people who worked with me said, we want you to go on the Alex Jones show 1.5 years ago and tell them that we have placed all kinds of emblems on the voting machines, and that was the beginning. So
you introduced the topic, and that's what we as Americans, what we want to see. We're holding on to hope. We were clinging to hope, and then now we just see disaster after disaster with this Biden administration, and we're wondering, why is it allowed to continue? And I know that you can speak on this, on the psychological aspect of this. Are Americans just not able to really understand how long something like this can take, be patient enough to see a game of psychological warfare? Or were we fooled and nothing is going to happen?
I think it's an issue of Americans understand it, but we needed time in order to show how much corruption there was in the system. It wasn't just last year or the year before. It's been going on for 50 years when initially we had 9/11, and I tried to bring those who were involved in 9/11, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, and for an accountability. It was wiped away. And that was a tragic day because on that day, we killed our own people, then went into Iraq, and then started another war. And they knew very well, I knew exactly how a false flag works because I knew how to use them. In turn, no one was held accountable for 20 years. Even Cheney to this day, who has a heart transplant, should have been placed in prison. Rumsfeld should have been placed in prison. Condoleezza Rice. Nothing was done. So what's happening is we're watching 50 to 75 years of non-accountability. This moron, Bush Jr., came in with a uniform and made believe that he had served our country. Yet this moron, including his father who lied, and I worked for his father, and Baker knew I did not like Bush Sr. because he lied about being shot down by the enemy when in fact he ejected from the plane. Same thing with Bush Jr. He lied about his service, he lied about what happened, and he started Iraq and Afghanistan war. Any accountability, my dear? None. And that's what I go on the show to say. Listen, it's time now to begin to arrest those who have gone against our government. The Cheneys, the Rumsfelds, all of them. Liz Cheney is nothing more than a surrogate of her father. She's pathetic. And all of this notion that we have a republic and they call it a democracy. I want all of our politicians to learn one simple lesson. Our founding fathers did not want a democracy, you morons, for the simple reason that each person would have had a vote. And that's what they learned from the French. Instead, we have a republic, which means it's representation. So from now on, the Condis and Nancy Pelosi, where do you think Pelosi comes from? Alessandro, corruption in Maryland. I had to deal with her father and her brother, old Italian mafia. No accountability.
So, Dr. Pieczenik, I am looking at a New York Times article from 1982, and in it you say secrecy and compartmentalization are essential to intelligence work. The problem is that those interests do not work well in a family setting. Well, this is back when the New York Times and all of the other publications used to quote you. I can't imagine why they don't come to you anymore as their house expert. But I wanted to ask about that in terms of are average Americans capable of dealing with and accepting the truth and reality of this game that you're speaking of? You're saying that we're still in this sting operation, which many people have lost faith in. Are we capable of grasping everything that's happening behind the scenes?
We're more than capable. And I speak as a refugee who came to this country and chose this country as my lifestyle. I grew up in France, I was born in Cuba, and I've been all over the world. The beauty of this republic is the fact that we are exceedingly strong and we can tolerate a lot of problems. I mean, we went through 1929. We got into World War II, and eventually we won in that war. What's happening now is what I called before in Alex's show a lavage. We're cleaning out a lot of the corruption that has permeated this entire society for over 50 to 70 years, led by our presidents, our vice presidents, our civilian leaders, senators, and congressmen. And we're allowing the American public to see how much crap, literally, there is in the White House and all over this country. However, if you go to individual states or you go down to the county level, you will see the beauty of this country and you will see its strength. In very simple terms, we are serial entrepreneurs. Whether you work for a salary or not, this country is geared so that you have to create your own advantage. You can take advantage of what's happening, or you can hold on to the nipple of the government. That's not going to happen. What you're seeing now is more and more people are taking control of their own life. We're getting a devolution of power, which is what I've wanted for 20 years, away from Washington, D.C. In a way, Biden, Anderson, Cooper, they're not relevant anymore. What's relevant to me is, did DeSantis say anything in Florida? Or did anybody say anything, Abbott say anything in Texas? And what you've seen, Christy, is the power shifted away from the East Coast, where we used to have, quote, the elite universities, the Harvard, the Yale, the MIT, and then on the West Coast, Berkeley and whatever. And you're seeing it come down to Florida, Texas, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Is that evolutionary? Yes. Does that mean we're in any way fallible? Probably. But the reality is no country in this world, and I've been in a lot of countries, is as quick to recover no matter what the situation is. If we had
that's what I would say, Dr. Pieczenik, is at what cost? I mean, we are seeing things like that. We are seeing more people awaken to what's going on. But again, at what cost? When I see that lives were lost in Afghanistan, you know, and just all of the other damage from this Biden administration, am I to accept that that was just collateral to people waking up and this is what it was going to take for something major to happen and get the country back?
I would agree with that latter part. Unfortunately, for Americans to understand why we went to wars that we did not need to do and why we lost these precious men and women in Afghanistan, they have to understand who's Zalmay Khalilzad. Who is that individual who worked for me in the 1980s, and I found him to be a sociopath and a liar from Afghan? And he went to the Rand Corporation. And then Trump brought him into the White House. And then Biden brought him into Afghanistan. But he personally created a war that lasted 20 years. And the reason I come on this show is to name the names. This is not just theoretical. He resigned yesterday. He shouldn't have resigned. He should have been sent to prison for what was done in Afghanistan and the amount of corruption that he created with Karzai. I remember the day when he brought in Karzai from Maryland. He ran a delicatessen and made him president of Afghanistan. Now, what you're seeing is not only the absurdity of our government, but its uselessness and how dangerous that government can be if we don't devolve, we don't create our own impetus on a local level, and we don't take the power away from Washington. I don't need a 2.2 million military. They're useless. I don't need an Air Force. I don't need a Navy. I've got to have kids who are 15 and 16 years old who know how to work the cyber command. I came out of China 10 years ago, and I sat down with three of my generals. One was Boykin, another was Keith Alexander. And I said to them, gentlemen, I have seen the most deadly weapon I have ever seen in my life. And they said, what is it? Is it a missile? I said, no. It was a 10-story bookstore with only English and American books, filled with Chinese students. And I turned around and said, tell me where I have a one-story bookstore with Chinese books. And the answer is our education is a disaster. So we start with our education. We get rid of what we have in the federal government. We start to emphasize what we need at the state government. We start to work at the local level. And that's what America has been about, will always be. We were born of revolution. We will continue to be in revolution. Because of my background, it's not a question I'm a psychiatrist or not. I particularly can live and understand crises, because through those crises, you become stronger or weaker. But people like you who come on the air and you've left other networks, you're part of that strength. When I see a woman, no woman has ever interviewed me. And I think that's wonderful, and particularly on the Alex Jones show. So it begins to tell me, hey, guys, we're waking up to what the real power in America should be. I would hope within my lifetime, within the next 10, 15 years, I'm tired of men becoming presidents. I want a woman to become a president.
But not Kamala. Not Kamala, right?
Kamala.
You have to make sure you make that clear.
Not Kamala, but I'm saying to you, and I don't think Kamala wants to be president, quite frankly. She has a nice little lifestyle. I think she just went in there to play the game. But the reality is, we have a lot of talent on the side. What I don't want is a Liz Cheney to come to the forefront representing who her father is. What I don't want is easier for me to tell you, but, you know, why can't I have a Christy Lay coming to do what you do and become a politician? Tell me that. Why not? You're not the first. Ronald Reagan was in the business of the TV, remember? He did shows. He was a spokesman for TV shows. But you are a reporter now. But the Christies of the world are the ones who can achieve. They're the ones who can grab and look for power and look innocent at the same time. That's why I admire you.
You got me speechless. I don't even know what to say to this.
Well, it's a dynamic. Let me tell you, it's the dynamic. I've treated women, and they're far more interesting to me as a psychiatrist than men are, because women have what we call a duality: submissive, dominant, passive, aggressive. I mean, you can see it constantly when you treat them. And
I can be passive aggressive. I can do all that one bit.
Yeah, but your charm and your sweetness belies the fact that you're ambitious, you can be tough, and you take rejection quite easily. I saw your interviews, and that's what I need. I need people who have been proven on the set, not necessarily going overseas, but I'm not flattering you. One of the reasons why I came on was I said, my God, no background, no history. She knew exactly.
You know, we've been trying to make sense. After you wake up and you really understand what's going on, how are people still buying into all of the lies? To the point that they defend the lies and they get angry when their point is challenged. And I was reading the definition of Stockholm syndrome, and it says psychological response wherein a captive begins to identify closely with his or her captors, as well as with their agenda and demands. So to segue, I have Dr. Pieczenik on with me today. And he has, of course, a background in psychiatry and a PhD at MIT in international relations. And as to the realm of expertise as a hostage negotiator, Dr. Pieczenik, is it fair to say that we might currently have a similar psychological trait as a hostage right now with everything going on? Maybe a type of Stockholm syndrome. Is that how you would explain these people that continue to stay loyal as their gas prices go up and they can't get basic food items and the economy is the way that it is? And it's so apparent in interface. Now we have more deaths from COVID than before we even had a vaccine. Yet some people still fiercely defend this administration. Are Americans being held hostage? What's going on?
Well, we're not being held hostage. What's happening is a majority of the Americans, with fear, you could see the power of fear and how it works in a system. I can create any kind of captivity. And in effect, they've created this nonsense where you get one vaccine that has no correlation to the coronavirus because the amino acid sequences are wrong. AGICA, they don't have that. They have 1,300 amino acids, and that's why you're getting side effects. So what we have here is correct. You said that. We have fear, then I'm telling you what to do, and then I'm going to ask you to put on a mask. If you would have asked me, would that have happened 10 years ago, I would have said, no way. So I learned something. Even in our society where we have the individualists, a majority of the people can be manipulated and held captive to the system and to fear. But you have to remember something else. Our Revolutionary War was never created by a majority of people. It was less than 3%. We're talking of a few hundred people, at most maybe 1,000, who really began to say, Britain, you're out of here, and we're creating our own country. Then Britain came back in 1812, and we said, okay, get out of here. Biden will leave one way or the other, I'll guarantee you. I'm not saying anything else, or the FBI will be here. Give me a subpoena. And the point I'm saying to you, yes, many people are held hostage, but thanks to people like you or Alex or others and people like myself, they're saying, all right, you want to take the vaccine, take it. You want to understand what the consequences are? Then go to the hospital. You'll see what happens. You want to understand how ineffectual my medical practice is and the doctors who are involved in this? Please, go ahead. I was a board examiner in neurology and psychiatry on a simple question, Christy. On a simple question, I had a patient in front of every examinee, and I said, is this neurological or psychiatric? 10 years in a row, they never gave me the right answer, just one or two, and 60% failed. Now it's giving you an idea how bad our medical system is and why it is that I don't go in and suddenly say, oh, yeah, I'm going to be the premier doctor. I'm going to be this or that. I did what I could. You have the Faucis of the world who lie and manipulate and create all kinds of financial agreements with Pfizer. How do you even bring Pfizer into the system when it's already $2 trillion in debt? J&J, AstraZeneca, they're all corrupt companies. Yet nobody wanted to stop it. And people like me or you or Dr. Rand Paul, who had to sit there and fight with Fauci, and that's why I admired Rand Paul and said, you're lying, Fauci. You're lying and you should be in prison. Now, if he does not go to prison for the felony he committed, for the lies he purposely pervaded, then we have a real problem. There are a lot of people who have to be incarcerated, and that's where the beginning starts. He was a felon, he's NIH, and he has to be held accountable. Whether he's public health or not, I don't know, I don't care. But I will tell you one thing. I knew Fauci, and I knew that he would ask for the greatest sum of money in the government. He makes more than the president of the United States. He asked to be reimbursed to the tune of $425,000 or $435,000 when the normal ceiling was about $260,000, and then his wife came in, and that was another $260,000.
It's so crazy. They just profit off of this so much. Correct. I wanted to get to talking to you about, because we did talk about the CIA. We keep on talking about these sinister plans that are happening behind the scenes, usually with the FBI or the CIA. And so I wanted to ask you about In-Q-Tel. There's talks of Facebook changing their name. And we saw that post from Jack from Twitter joking about the Facebook that they should change their name to Central Intelligence Corporation. And so how far off is this tweet from reality? And is In-Q-Tel responsible for making these big tech corporations getting so huge?
Yes, I will say yes, Chris. And honestly, I had an indirect relationship. And most of the money that I made was not in medicine or anything else. I was a serial entrepreneur, and I did it in Alexandria, Virginia, and different places in Virginia, and I enjoyed it. We created like 24 companies. The CIA came to me in the late 90s and said, what are you doing? I said, well, I create these startups. Some of them have software, some of them have something else. And so I had said to them, you need a financial capacity to also create startups. So it wasn't malevolent thought, and In-Q-Tel was created, and it was beneficent at that point. And they said, look, we have something called Google. Well, I didn't know what that was. I mean, you're talking about 20, 30 years ago. I have something called Facebook, which started. And so they invested in a lot of new companies. And then if a certain amount of a growth occurred within that company, then DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, would come in and fund them. So
it sounds like these companies are actually funded by the American people, yet they're suppressing our speech.
You got it. Now you hit it on the head. You hit it right on the head. It's CIA and DARPA funding plus other units of the military. They're not funded out of serial entrepreneurs or suddenly high. None of these guys who had these funds really could make companies like that without the advantage of DARPA or In-Q-Tel. And it's important for America to see what In-Q-Tel really is. And that was created by the CIA. And on the surface, it was supposed to be benevolent. But like all benevolent entities, they corrupted themselves.
So what can we do about this? I mean, this I'm sure can remind you of like the Church Pike Committee and them finding out where the CIA was into and influencing things. Can we have a return of that? Is there any hope of that?
I'm not impressed with our politicians. What has to happen, it has to be more private and far more secretive. You've got to begin to take out the operatives who are in the agency. In other words, we're getting tired of the director of the CIA. He's been there a long time. John Brennan is back there. Obama came out of there. What we don't say is, oh my God, how many of these people have been co-opted by the CIA? The Clintons went to Yale. Oh, and then which is the biggest school of all? Yale. Where did they produce the most CIA operatives? Yale. Who was a big CIA operative? John Bolton. John Bolton, a CIA operative, he wasn't that smart or that effective, yet he went to Yale. I can go on and tell you, Zalmay Khalilzad, CIA. We have so much corruption in that system that you need people like me to come in and clean it out. It can't be done.
Dr. Pieczenik, we have 1 minute, so give us some hope in this last minute. How are we going to clean this up, and when's it going to happen? We want to know.
It's going to happen because people like you are asking people like me what we should do. And people like you are far more important than people like me, because we'll do the dirty work, but with a pleasant face and a smart attitude and being a wonderful interviewer, you will go much further than I will. Because the minute I walk into a door, they know that's trouble. And so you can keep smiling and look attractive, and no one will know the better. That's your
You mean all I have to do is smile and everything's going to start changing? Well, that's great news. Dr. Pieczenik, oh my goodness, it's been such a pleasure. I look forward to speaking to you again. I'm going to hold you hostage. Make sure you talk to me again, because I didn't even scratch the surface. My husband, your big fan, is going to be disappointed.
Give him my request.
Thank you, Dr. Pieczenik.